Hello, welcome to my channel. This is What If Naruto Saves Karin from a Bear in the Forest of Death Part 8. Check out the author in the description and the fanfic, and have a nice day.
Kimimaro's body was breaking down. His heart threatened to give out with every passing second, and probably would have already if not for a cocktail of drugs that kept his adrenaline high and numbed the pain that came from his illness. His cells were being eroded from the inside out due to the invasive chakra of the Jinchuriki, only to be regenerated thanks to properties of the natural energy coursing through the cursed seal that Lord Orochimaru bestowed upon him. But they wouldn't last. They were only temporary measures to keep his ailing body moving, borrowed time at best. It would run out, and then he would die, the flames of life snuffed out like a candle. Knowing that, he rose to his feet and stared down the Jinchuriki sporting three tails now. The boy's cloak was bubbling on the inside, a violent maelstrom of corrupted chakra that steamed the air and blighted the land. To pierce it, he would have to use the densest weapon in his arsenal. The moment that the Jinchuriki tensed, he sunk himself into the nearest bone and became one with his surroundings. In that state, he was aware of everything that went on in his domain, the forest of bones with their roots deep within the earth. Safe from the chakra claws that caused the ivory spire he'd taken refuge in to wither away after he shunted himself into a different one, Kimimaro crafted a lance of the densest bone that he could from his palm, spiraling it around to compact as much mass as he could into as little space as possible. Then he jettisoned himself towards the backside of the younger shinobi, a streaking blur of gray and white. The point of his lance speared through empty space as, in a mere instant, the Jinchuriki speared its tails into the ground and used them to rise above his joust, bringing his chakra arms down and expanding them as he raked the ground. They nearly caught the bone user in a pass until he lashed his tail against the ground to change directions and sink into another osseous tree, moments before the Jinchuriki made contact with it in chase. Surging through the forest of bones, he compelled them to sprout. Bony branches emerged, turning every spire surrounding the Jinchuriki into a wall of spear-length thorns upon which Kimimaro intended to skewer him. All at once they shifted to point towards their intended target and fired down. It was a rain of white death. An attack from all angles that would leave no escape, no matter how fast the opposition was. Composed of bones dense enough that even the cloak shouldn't be able to waste them away on contact, they would turn Naruto into a pincushion. Yet all it took was a single roar to make it worthless. Backed by the increased chakra reserves, the bestial roar became an expanding shockwave of sound and air that served as a physical object. It scattered the rotted earth, toppled the ivory spires, and sent the raining spears astray from the Jinchuriki sitting at the bottom of the crater that formed, shifting his head back and forth in search of his foe. Then the feral instincts screamed of an impending attack. The boys' tails lashed out towards the threat coming from behind. They ended up smashing ones of the toppled bone spires that had been launched towards him. That was when Kimimaro erupted from the ground and impaled him from below, through the stomach with the lance forged on his arm. The closeness of the cloak to his body left him feeling as though he was standing next to a fire, but he bore with it to spin around. Carrying the Jinchuriki on the neck of the lance, he slammed the tip into the ground and staked Naruto into place as the boy screamed in agony. Kimimaro backed away after separating his arm from the weapon, leaving Naruto impaled and pinned to the ground. It looked to be over as Naruto raked at the lance, as with his claws to no immediate avail. But it wouldn't last for long. Signs of bone rot were already setting in around the wound that frothed. There was no getting around it. The boy was too dangerous to be left alive, more so if he could sprout another tail and become even stronger. Compared to bringing in the other two, the loss of the Jinchuriki was acceptable since it would also hamper the Leaf Village. No matter how resilient his healing factor, taking off his head would be the end of it. Kimimaro raised his hand, a sliver of ivory emerging from his palm as a long blade to decapitate the boy. Then a familiar pulsing sense of pain flared throughout his body. A vicious cough forced blood up through his throat and out of his mouth as it made his heart ache, dropping him to a knee. Not yet, he thought desperately as he tried to keep it in check. The exertion and exposure to the tailed beast's chakra had strained the reserves of the cursed seal and drugs. I have to finish this quickly. His thoughts froze abruptly as a wet sound accompanied a hot lance of pain that shot through his chest. His eyes fell down to see that the end of a chakra tail had punched through his body from the rear, having extended from the cloak into the ground and then tunneled to take him from behind. Strength fled his body as his lungs stilled, leaving him unable to support himself as the tail whipped itself and tossed his body aside like a rag doll. He came to a stop on the ground, unable to breathe as his ruined lungs failed to function. The transformation of the cursed seal wore off, melting away to leave nothing but his pale body. The gaping hole in his torso didn't bleed, but instead a dark and cancerous blemish spread out from the wound. Not that he could feel it, or feel anything really. In an instant after the pain, even before he'd been flung, a cold numbness spread across his body that was devoid of strength. Straining to stay awake, he could do nothing but lament his failure as the Jinchuriki finished freeing himself, and then lunged for him with a chakra arm raised, forming into sharpened claws with serrated points. As his death neared, time seemed to slow and stretch. It was torture to Kimimaro, unable to do anything as the thought of dying without being able to repay the debt he felt he owed Orochimaru for all he'd done haunted him. He could only curse the Jinchuriki with his final thoughts as the claws descended. Then there was nothing. "Damn it," Karin said, her voice strained as she worked the kunai into the dirt and used it as a makeshift spade. The moment that Naruto let loose that roar, they had been tossed due to the displaced air and force. It was only by some miracle they had managed not to end up crushed entirely by the towering spires that came tumbling down. However, Enko's left forearm was wedged beneath one and the ground and was broken at the very least. It was too big for Karin to lift, but if she could create enough space between them, then Enko could slip it out. Of course, it'd be easier to focus on the task at hand if not for what she felt what was transpiring elsewhere. "How bad is it with him?" Enko asked in the wake of the swearing and a distant crashing sound. "He had 3 tails when he caught us in that roar, didn't he? Can you feel if he's still in control?" "The sound shinobi is dead now, but—" Karin bit her lower lip, leaning forward and scrunching her brows up as she kept digging. Naruto's chakra was slowly growing more and more faint. It was being swallowed up by the 9-tailed fox's chakra and buried within the hatred, like a salt cube being eroded in sea. Enko seemed to pick up at least how serious the situation was from her silence. "Can he be saved?" "If I can wrap a chain around him, then I might be able to suppress the 9-tailed fox's chakra long enough for him to take control," she said as she hurriedly shoveled the kunai into the dirt. "But the longer this takes, the worse it'll get, if it goes too far." Enko sighed. "Go then, I can free myself from here." "I'll be right back," Karin promised as she passed back the kunai, jumped to her feet, and darted towards Naruto. He needed her more at the moment. She wove through the field of discarded spear-like protrusions and crossed the crater that had been formed towards where she sensed the bone user's chakra be snuffed out. Karin almost vomited when she arrived. The air had gone putrid and hot, worse than even the foulest locations she had come across in her life. She held her hand over her mouth and clenched her throat to force the bile rising up back down, along with the scream of horror as she stared at what had become of Naruto. He'd gone feral, hammering the chakra arms against all that was left of his opponent's body, a stew of rotted and battered meat, roaring in fury. The 9-tailed fox's chakra kept swelling, even with the threat gone. If it continued to do so, his own sun-tinged chakra would be swallowed whole entirely. She gathered the remaining chakra that she had and tried to form the chakra chains again. Midway, she faltered as the limitations of the day were reached. The length of chain that dangled from her right hand was little more than a pathetically short whip, but it was solid enough that it could be used if she got close. "This is going to hurt," she thought to herself as the muscles in her legs tensed to move. That bubbling cloak was like seething lava that wrapped him, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to handle maintaining contact with it for long. But there was no other way to help him right now, so if that meant a little pain, she'd endure it. That in mind, Karin swallowed her hesitation and threw herself towards the maelstrom of malevolent chakra. It was oppressive, battering at her flesh and mind as the air grew hotter the closer she got. She wrapped the chain around her forearm and placed it in front of her to try and see if it had any effect, but nothing changed and wouldn't unless she made contact with the cloak. "Naruto," she called out as he continued to pound at the spot where the bone user had died. "Calm down." The pounding stopped as he turned towards her. His eyes were now completely red like dying stars, sections of his skin peeling off to expose the muscle beneath the surface. The tails began to shift and close in around her, perceiving her as a threat to snuff out like the one before. Karin barely managed to get away from the first one with a graze to her side, and that felt like it had burned her there. The second one tried to sweep her away, but she narrowly avoided it by flinging herself forward and onto the ground. That left the third to try and crush her, forcing Karin to bring her arm with the chain wrapped around it in defense. It popped on contact with the chain, unraveling and pulling back before reforming itself. "It's me," she called out to him again. This time she felt his chakra respond within the maelstrom. "It's Karin." The tails that were getting ready to attack her again stilled. Get away." The two chakras' signatures began to fluctuate now as he tried to regain control. He brought his hand to his head and curled into himself, the cloak's rampant bubbling slowing down. Hard to control. "I can help you." She ran forward while the tails were under control, closing the distance to where she felt like she was burning alive. She ignored the pain as she felt his control waver. "Just hang on a little longer." "Stop." The chakra itself slinked out to stop her. It lashed out in the form of writhing tendrils despite Naruto's efforts to suppress it. "Stay back." Karin unfurled the length of chain from around her arm and used it as a whip to strike down the acrid tendrils where she could as they stood in her path. Contact with the small tendrils was enough to make the chakra composing them disperse, but the numbers were too great as they struck her body in retaliation and seared where they touched, flesh and clothes alike. "Ah!" She couldn't keep her voice in check as the pain mounted with the lashes. Each spot blossomed with pain that sank deep and took root. One even struck her across the face and knocked her glasses off, breaking the lenses and denying her the ability to see without them. But Karin could still perceive it all with her mind's eye, allowing her to make out Naruto still struggling to regain control and keeping it from doing worse. That drove her to keep pressing ahead. She wasn't going to let him lose himself to the fox sealed inside of him, not when he went that far to save them. Pushing through the pain until he was finally within reach, she lunged for him. There was a flare of unholy agony as the boiling cloak of chakra withstood the chain's attempt at suppressing it on mere contact. But she managed to guide the chain around him and pulled it with her other hand, successfully forming a loop around his stomach and sealing off the source from where it all bubbled up. The nine-tailed fox's chakra was sealed away once more, leaving Naruto to collapse unconscious. Karin fell right next to him, in enough pain that tears were leaving her eyes with every agonizing breath. The corrosive nature of the chakra was worming its way into her body, and if she didn't act fast it would become poison that rotted her body away. So she brought her trembling arm to her mouth and sank her teeth into her own burned flesh, the skin crunching with a sickening sound that made her stomach churn. The healing bite's effect kicked in. It was enough to purge the invasive chakra from her body and reduce the severity of the burns, but that was the third time she'd been bitten tonight. There just wasn't enough chakra saturating her body to do more than that, nor in her reserves at all, leaving her weak and wanting nothing more than to pass out. But she couldn't afford to now. Not when 3 chakra signatures that she recognized came into her range. The pursuers from before hadn't given up. Even with all the distance Byakko put between them, they managed to cover enough ground that they'd be there soon enough. Karin forced her body to move. With trembling arms, she grabbed Naruto and began to drag him towards Anko's signature. They had to get away before they were set upon again and taken to Kabuto. The pained groan that left Anko's mouth turned into a heavy sigh as she wrenched her arm free through the furrow that she managed to finish digging around it. The awkward angle and distorted flesh made it abundantly clear that it was broken. Today has not been my day. Anko winced as a spike of pain rippled through her as she made a splint for it, and then rose to her feet. She'd need to get it looked at back at the village, but first she had to find her charge and the boy. So she set out to find them by following the trail of destruction left behind, and couldn't help but feel horrified when she did. The younger Kunoichi stood trembling, her clothes ruined and torn to reveal mild chakra burns all over her body. Her glasses were nowhere to be found as she tried pulling Naruto along with her, likely unable to even see in front of her face. The boy looked as bad, with bits of his skin peeled off, and was unconscious. Anko ran over in time as Karin's legs gave out and gently lowered them to the ground. "Hey, are you okay?" "We have to go," she muttered, eyes half-lidded as she tried to rise. Her arms couldn't even support her own weight and gave out, leaving her to whimper. The others coming. Others? Tension ran up Anko's spine at that as she registered what the girl meant. "You mean the ones that had been chasing us before? How far away are they from us?" 2 minutes. Karin's body twitched slightly, and she groaned in pain. The burns were taking their toll on her, it seemed. She was in no condition to fight, and the boy was unconscious. Anko's mind raced. Those sound shinobi were already strong enough to push them to their limits before, and with only 2 out of 5 taken care of it still left them at a disadvantage. And that was before she factored in the protecting the kids and her own injuries, which left only one real option for her to take. She had to get them out of there. Even if she didn't like the thought of having to fend off 3 more cursed seal users on her own, it was better than allowing the pair to end up in the midst of anyone affiliated with Orochimaru. She wouldn't be much of an aspiring teacher if she was willing to throw them to the wolves just to save herself after all. Enduring the pain as she made the necessary hand seals, Anko slammed her hand onto the ground. The mole snake appeared once more in response to her summoning. It drew close and loomed over her in attention. "Did you get the last one to the village?" she asked. When the serpent bobbed its head, she reached up with her good hand and ran her fingers along its head. "Good. Now can you do me one final favor and get these 2 to the village in your stomach?" The mole snake shifted its body along the ground and peered at pair of Uzumaki, before turning back to its summoner and flicking its tongue. "I know that you only like taking one person at a time because it hurts your stomach to fit more in there, but this is an emergency." Anko repositioned Karin so that she was against Naruto. The girl whimpered in pain, but didn't fight her on it. "They should be small enough to fit if they stay close, so do it for me, okay?" It hesitated for a moment and then nodded. "Thanks." The older Kunoichi then turned her attention to Karin. "This is going to be very uncomfortable and will probably hurt like hell considering the state of your body, but don't move and hold on to him in there as tight as you can. When you do get to the village, tell the Hokage everything. Understand?" Wise, Karin moved her arms around Naruto's unconscious form and held him tight against her body. Then she closed her eyes as the snake's maw opened wide and swallowed them both whole. Moments later, both of them were inside of the serpent's belly as it sank into the earth, speeding off underground towards safety. That left Anko alone with the whistling night breeze that sifted through the remaining ivory spires that made up the forest of bones. Despite knowing the odds of the battle to come, she felt relief spread throughout her body. Those 2 had the potential to do so much good for the village that it would be a shame if it was snuffed out now. Even if Anko ended up being caught or killed, knowing she'd secured their future was good enough for now. That being said, she had no intention of going down without a fight. She moved with hurried steps, using the remaining minute she had as a head start to hide in a dense portion of the osseous trees. Then she reached for her remaining kunai with her good hand, stood up straight, and sharpened her senses in anticipation. If they wanted her, Anko was going to make them work for it. Sarutobi Hiruzen fought the urge to yawn as the night dragged on. Reports continuously came in regarding the escapees, their numbers now few. It wouldn't be long before those that were still within the land of fire were captive. The mystery of how they escaped had been solved, courtesy of a messenger towed from Naruto and questioning a few of the escapees, but the reason why eluded him even now. Granted, there were other questions still to be answered, like how they knew of Naruto's location. But with the sound shinobi captured by Anko, they would have them in time. Inoichi and Ibiki would see to that much, so he settled on rubbing his eyes with his good hand for now, rather than stew on the machinations of Orochimaru's right-hand man. "You shouldn't push yourself, old man," said the only other person in the room. Looking out at the village from the window was Tsunade, a transformation hiding her normal appearance and several documents in her hand. She had come to help with the workload, even if she was reluctant to be seen. "You're still recovering." "There's no one else who can do this at the moment with Jiraiya away," he said with a sigh. Jiraiya should have received word by now on the matter, but it would still be hours before he could return. Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door that drew their attention. Once permission was given and Anbu entered. The man was adorned in a flak jacket, a mask that had a cat's face on it, and a sword on the right side of his back. "Tenzo, what news do you have for me?" Sarutobi asked. "A pair of our shinobi have been brought to the village's gates by a snake summoning," he reported. "One of them is Naruto Uzumaki, who has sustained numerous injuries and required immediate medical attention." The kunoichi accompanying him, identifying herself as Karin Uzumaki, claimed she has information to report to you as she was escorted to the hospital for her injuries. "I see." That left him in a bit of a predicament. He shouldn't leave his post in the middle of things as they stood, but the information that she held could prove vital. Not to mention when he attempted to rise to his feet moments before, the bones in his back loudly contested the decision with audible crackles as a testament to his age. "Guard their room and ensure that no one enters for now, Tenzo. I'll have someone sent along shortly." As the Anbu departed from the room with haste, off to accomplish his task, the Hokage turned to Tsunade. She picked up where he was going without the need for words. "You want me to go?" "I cannot leave my post at the moment, and the information that she has could be pertinent," he said. "There's no one more qualified to look after the members of your grandmother's clan than you are." Next to Shizune, they were possibly the closest ties she had to family through her grandmother's side. The same Uzumaki blood also flowed through her veins to an extent, and he would like to have her tested to see if she could also utilize those masks that were retrieved from the temple as well. However, he had been putting it off until she was in a better state of mind since her enforced sobriety, which had left her cranky, for lack of a better term. "Or would you rather take my place here and handle overseeing everything until my return?" A slight, indignant huff left her mouth at that. "You don't have to try and blackmail me. I'm going. Just tell me what I need to know about the brats." "The closest thing I have to a family, huh?" Tsunade couldn't help but feel a little offended that the old man tried to play that card in an effort to get her to act. The only people she could call family were already dead, with perhaps the exception of Shizune. Still, taking a report and checking on some mild injuries were far easier than dealing with all the documentation that he had to do. It was also probably meant to test whether or not her therapy was having any real effect so far. Shizune was on call at the hospital at the moment, so it probably would have crossed his mind for her to call in her apprentice for help in looking after them if she couldn't. Arriving at the hospital while in her disguise, she presented the seal given to her by the old man to the Anbu standing at attention in front of the door. He moved, allowing her to enter into the room. There she found the two Uzumaki. The blond boy that Jiraiya was fond of was lying unconscious on the bed, in an examination gown. The girl, also in an examination gown, was staring at Tsunade from his bedside, despite there being a second one 2 steps away that she should be resting on given the situation. That rankled Tsunade to an extent, when patients did things that could worsen their condition. What was the point in treating them then? Taking a look at the charts laid out on the table, she saw that they had done some preliminary treatment for the burns in the girl's case. That involved cleaning the wounds of whatever they may have come into contact with while in a snake's stomach, giving her medication to help with the pain control, and applying dressings to them as a temporary measure to keep the nerve endings from being exposed for the moment. There were tears in her eyes, but it was hard to tell if that was from the pain, as it was generally a bad idea for someone with burn wounds to move around actively, or because of the boy. The boy's charts read different enough that she'd need to see it herself the extent of the damage. "You're the woman from when they woke me up," Karin said, breaking the silence to that point. "Why are you wearing a disguise over that genjutsu?" "That's my business," Tsunade said in a dismissive tone. "If you remember that I was there when you first woke up, then you know I'm familiar with the Hokage. He sent me here to find out what happened and see if I can treat your wounds." "Naruto first," the girl said. "I just have mild chakra burns and exhaustion, but he had it worse. I'll be the one to determine that." She walked over to the boy's bedside. "Lie down in the other bed and explain what happened while I look into him." Karin looked reluctant to leave his side until Tsunade gave her a stern stare. Then she stepped back until she reached the opposite bed and sat on it. "How much do you know already?" "Everything the old man told me." She opened the examination gown and peeled back the dressings enough to where she could see just how severe the damage was. At a glance, parts of his epidermis and the layers beneath it were outright gone, exposing the muscular system beneath it. There weren't standard signs of burns present, so it wasn't a fire technique, and a wind technique didn't seem likely given the shape. More concerning was the fact that the most damaged part was his abdomen, where his seal was located at. She suspected that it was still intact since there was no rampaging giant fox at present to further compound the old man's troubles. But they needed to get Jiraiya here fast. With her hands alight with pale green light, Tsunade hovered them over his injuries to find that the wounds were still saturated with traces of the tailed beast's chakra that lingered. It would need to be purged before the wounds could be properly healed, and that would take time. What drove him to using the nine-tailed fox's chakra to this extent? "We were attacked by people with cursed seals that could activate a second-stage transformation," she said. "One of them could use their bones as a weapon, and he was too strong. Naruto brought out a tail to fight him, but he had to go to 3 when the bone user went to a second-stage transformation. It would have gone further if I hadn't stepped in at the last moment, but his body was like that. Well, he doesn't seem to be getting worse, but they're probably going to have to keep him under to prevent him from feeling any pain until Jiraiya can get here to check on his seal." Replacing the dressing, Tsunade moved over to Karin and had her lie down so she could check on her injuries. "How did you stop him?" "Earlier today, my overseer and I discovered that I could create chains of chakra," she said. "They somehow seal foreign chakra. Then we got called out to go on the search and everything went wrong. I had to get close to stop him and then bite myself to heal, but there was nothing left in me. We only got away because she stayed behind after her summoning swallowed us. You have to send someone to get her before they take her to Kabuto." "Do you know why they came after you?" Tsunade asked while checking on the extent of damage to her body. The girl's burns looked mild, but from how she was talking they were far more severe until she healed herself. They could be treated relatively easily, at the very least. "You're the only ones who were actively attacked from the sound of it." "I don't really. All I know is that they didn't want us dead," Karin said. "They wanted us alive, so they kept trying to cripple us. We sent one of them tied up to the village. Did you learn anything from her?" "T&I is handling that as we speak." Tsunade hovered her hands over Karin's bite marks to see if they were possible to heal. It seemed like even though she could heal herself to where the damage done would heal to good as new and wouldn't produce scar tissue on its own, the marks were permanently imprinted through them upon being used as a medium to heal the rest of her body. It was fascinating from a medical standpoint, but for now that could wait. She needed to tell the Hokage about what she learned. Pain stung at Naruto as he woke up, only for the glare of sunlight leaking through the blinds of the room to spear into his eyes. He screwed his eyes shut and turned his head away from it on reflex, his thoughts sluggish as his mind felt like it was cloudy. Slowly opening his eyes again, he took in the details of his surroundings and realized that he was in a hospital room. How did I get here? As he focused on that question in his mind, the memories bubbled back up to the surface in vivid flashes. He could recall the pain of being pierced, the seething hatred and strength coursing through his body like a raging river, and how he fought to keep himself above it and regain control as the cloak attacked Karin and she threw herself into it. Dryness clawed at his throat as the hoarse words tried to come out, leaving him coughing violently. He churned his tongue against the roof and inner lining of his cheeks to soothe it, swallowing whatever saliva he could, but it wasn't enough. A soft moan reached his ears from the blinding light that he turned away from, a rising shadow being cast over his head. Naruto, are you awake now? He forced his head to turn around and see that Karin was in a chair by his bedside. Her red hair was disorderly and her eyes were droopy as she rubbed them. But she was alive, which lightened the weight he felt in his chest. "Thank goodness you're awake," Karin said, a soft smile on her face filled with relief. "You've been out for about 2 days now. How do you feel?" He tried to speak, but the cough came back. "Oh, she said that you might be thirsty if you woke up today. I'll get you some water." Karin immediately fetched him a glass of water and supported his head upwards so that he could drink it enough to ease the dryness in his throat. "Better?" "Yeah." He sighed as the cool water also brought clarity as she laid his head back down on the pillow. He tried to move his body only to find that it was non-responsive. The signals were being sent, but his body felt too weak to respond. When he tried to mold chakra, he found that it was cut off as well. "Why can't I move or feel my chakra?" "They said that you had pushed your body a bit too hard and wanted to make sure that you could heal properly, so they needed to seal your chakra flow." She placed her hand over his stomach, above the examination gown. "Jiraiya-san came in yesterday and did this thing where his fingers were alight with chakra, pressing it to your stomach seal. He said it would block off the chakra from the nine-tailed fox, and then drew another one to leach out the rest so they could properly heal you, but stated it would leave you unconscious for an additional day. They sealed it." Now that he thought about it, the feeling was similar to when the snake bastard had screwed with his seal in the forest of death. But more than that, he remembered why they would do so. It made his expression slough off from one of relief to sorrow. "I hurt you, didn't I?" "That wasn't you," she said, her tone soft and reassuring. "In fact, if you hadn't been trying so hard to keep it under control, I wouldn't have been able to help you. And it's not like I was hurt that badly. They healed me right up while you slept, but they wanted to keep me in for observation." "I still shouldn't have used it," he said. "I was so angry after he stabbed you that I lost it. After that it just kept pushing me to go further. I didn't want to go to 3 tails because I wasn't sure I could control it. But if I didn't..." "Naruto, you didn't have a choice." She moved her hand down towards where his was, and her fingers closed around it. Even the Hokage agreed. "The old man came by?" She nodded. "He had someone look into my memories to share them with him and Jiraiya-san and that woman they were with. They said that the bone user was a member of some kind of clan from the land of water that was supposed to be wiped out. Those people from Sound killed Anbu officers, and he was stronger than them. So they agreed that you didn't have a choice. If anything, I was the one who couldn't do enough." Her smile faltered and her shoulders fell as she lowered her head, hiding her eyes. "I had to be protected by you and Anko-san, and it led to you relying on the nine-tailed fox's chakra while she sacrificed herself so that we could get away. I couldn't even stop Byaku's mask from being shattered in the end, and I couldn't even heal the damage to your body. I was mostly useless." She looked like she was on the verge of crying. Naruto wanted to reach up to comfort her, but couldn't even move his arm well enough to do so. He settled for twisting his hand around so that he could try to at least hold hers. "It's okay. No one could have seen that happening. But I should have, she said. I should have known Kabuto would come after me, but I didn't, and he crippled me for it. He got around my mind's eye and left me helpless the majority of the time. The only reason it wasn't a repeat of what happened during the invasion was because the chakra chains I found out how to make not even an hour before we got called out. Even then I had to be carried and protected the entire time because of the stupid seal placed on me. Naruto blinked at that. Chakra chains? She cupped her hands and a golden chain emerged from her palm. I'm not really sure what they are. I was just trying to make chakra threads and they assumed this form. The only thing I do know is that they can interfere and inhibit chakra. The more accurate name is adamantine sealing chains, a voice piped up from the window. Karin turned her body and stepped out of the way so Naruto could make out that it was Jiraiya standing outside the window. When did he get there? Adamantine sealing chains? Karin held the chain up towards him. Did you and the Hokage know that I could do this then? We couldn't be sure, Jiraiya said as he entered the window and started walking towards them. It's a very rare trait found in some members of the Uzumaki clan's chakra, who are scattered as is. The only user I've ever met was Naruto's mother, who was proficient enough with them that she could create a barrier that isn't easily breached. That and the nature of her chakra was the reason that she was brought to the village in the first place. The Toad Sage came to a stop in front of the bed and addressed Naruto. How are you feeling, kid? I can't move well, but other than that I'm fine, Naruto said, his thoughts partially on what was said about his mother. There was a story there that Naruto wanted to know about. The way he spoke implied that his mother had something special inherent to her beyond working on his seal. That's good, all things considered, he said. There's a lot we need to talk about involving both of you, so I'll start with the bad news first. As of this moment, neither of you will be allowed to leave the village's territory until further notice. Jiraiya, or rather a clone of the original, knew he was going to hate being the one to bring them the bad news when Naruto just woke up. On the way there, he could just picture how the kids would look when he told them. And his imagination just so happened to prove on point as Naruto looked betrayed. The boy opened and closed his mouth twice before he asked, "Why? Was it because I left my mission?" Of course not. It's just not safe for you, Karin, or anyone else marked to leave too far from the village after what happened, Jiraiya explained. So until we can remove them, both of you and the Uchiha boy will need to remain off missions that leave you where we can't reach easily. I know it's not fair after you've just become a Chunin, and we're working on dealing with the immediate situation, so just give us a little time. Did you at least find out why they were after Karin then? Naruto asked. The clone of the Toad Sage nodded. They'd already managed to glean why the Sound Four, as they called themselves, were after Anko Mitarashi and Karin. They wanted to revive Orochimaru somehow, and that was tied into the cursed seals they possessed. In all honesty, learning that had made Jiraiya want to leave out in search of them right away. He thought he had found closure with the death of Orochimaru, and that he had corrected the mistake of letting his old teammate live so he could commit more horrors in the name of science and his mad ambition. For him to come back now would make everything amount to nothing. But Tsunade had been the one to stop him by pointing out that it was meaningless to do so alone, and the old man backed her. It was likely that anyone who had a cursed seal could be used in whatever revival ritual they had. Aside from the surviving members of the group that attacked Naruto and Karin, there was no telling how many people had been marked. It was likely that Kabuto chose the two from their village simply out of spite, and Orochimaru could have easily been revived without their knowledge. That only left them two reasonable ways to be rid of Orochimaru once and for all. The first was that they found some way to kill every portion of his soul at once, but none of them knew anything like that. Soul manipulation was an obscure field of techniques for a reason, and even the third Hokage who knew techniques for every element only knew of two personally that influenced the souls, and only one that he could use at the cost of his own life. The second was that they killed off the people who had the knowledge of the revival method. Such knowledge would be guarded jealously, that much they could glean from their captives' memories, so the only ones likely to have it were those high up in the ranks. That meant the only way to be rid of them for good would be killing Orochimaru a second time, making sure that Kabuto followed, and torching all evidence of such a method existing. To that end, they'd already taken measures to do the second. Karin-chan, you don't have your mind's eye on right now, do you? Her hair swayed slightly as she shook her head. Not at the moment. I was told to use it moderately in the village by Anko-san until what happened. I figured the least I could do was keep to what she was teaching me before then. Right, well, I'm a shadow clone. The original me is currently out looking for her with a team to act on the information we have from that sound kunoichi you captured. I was left behind specifically to check up on the two of you and to clear the air on something that's been a long time coming, in the event that something happens the original during the mission. He reached behind his back into a pouch and then pulled out a framed photo of Kushina and Minato, one of few in existence that survived to this day because he kept it with him. It was handed off from the original, not a shadow clone-made copy. As Naruto couldn't raise his arms at the moment, he handed it to Karin instead. That's both of his parents together. She took a look at it and her mouth dropped in shock. Even if she wasn't born in the village, she had seen the face on the mountain and in history books for her citizenship. So there was no way she wouldn't recognize him before she turned it over to Naruto. Just the same, Naruto's cerulean eyes rose in disbelief as they fell onto the picture. That's... He looked over to the clone, questioning whether or not it was some kind of deception. That's the fourth Hokage. Minato Namikaze, Jiraiya's clone said. The only student of mine that survived long enough to become something great, and with him is his wife, the former host of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Those are your parents, Naruto. I'm sorry it took this long for me to tell you. There were no words for a moment as Naruto stared at the photo, lost in thought. Karin, on the other hand, pursed her lips and then turned to Jiraiya's clone. Wait, what do you mean she was the last host? The history books state that the attack was a natural disaster. For her to be a former host would mean that it was in the village the entire time. The Nine-Tailed Fox was first sealed into Mito Uzumaki sometime after the village was founded, and she carried it inside of her even after her husband and his brother died, well into Sensei's reign. But as long-lived as members of your clan are, she couldn't live forever. And on her death, the Nine-Tailed Fox would break free. So they needed someone suitable to become the next host. Naruto said softly, slowly coming out of his shock as he looked back up to clone of the Toad Sage. His eyes were glistening now. And that was my mother? Her chakra had a quality to it that made it heavily potent against that of the fox. So Mito asked that she be brought over from Whirlpool alone. That's probably one of the reasons that she made it out when most of the other Uzumaki didn't when the village was destroyed. Karin's expression faltered at that, and a note of sympathy could be heard in her voice as she asked, was her family there when it happened? Yeah, they were. And by then Mito was dead. She housed the Nine-Tailed Fox, and shortly after there was a kidnapping attempt on her by Cloud. Those factors bode ill for any Jinchuriki's mental state, so the third Hokage had her under watch after that for a while. If not for her relationship with Minato, I don't think she would have been able to hold it together as well as she did. They were together back then? Naruto asked. Technically, they met when she was enrolled in the old academy. Your father was also a student at the time, a prodigy. She didn't think much of him then, while he thought her hair was beautiful. But that changed when she was kidnapped. She tore out strands of her hair one at a time, leaving a trail for someone to follow, and your father was the only one who noticed them. That day he saved her was the day their relationship changed, and 12 years ago you were ready to be born when... Something went wrong, Naruto finished. It got out when I was born. There was foul play, he said, before Naruto assumed he was the cause. The day you were about to be born, they took her somewhere safe to give birth with a few guards and midwives, including the sensei's wife. Minato was there to ensure that the seal didn't break. But something happened. The nine-tailed fox got free, and when it was over we found all the people who were supposed to be guarding them murdered efficiently and without any sign of resistance and assassination. He had suspicions that it was less personal towards Minato and more an act against the village as a whole. For one thing, most of the enemies he made would have openly proclaimed they were responsible rather than allowing it to pass as a natural disaster. Yet no army marched in to follow up and finish the job, and their spies picked up nothing about it in rival villages. Regardless, Minato made a lot of enemies, he continued. We couldn't risk them learning of you, his son, while you weren't able to defend yourself. So we kept who you were a secret, and kept the whole truth from you until now. Believe me when I say that all of us who knew wanted to tell you when we felt you were ready. Naruto closed his eyes as a pair of crystalline tears ran down his cheeks. It had been too much for him to take in right now. His throat shifted as he tried to swallow the emotions that refused to be bottled up, but the tears still continued to fall. Karin set down the photo she'd been holding up for him and instead wrapped her arms around Naruto. Guiding him forward, she pulled him close to her heart and kept him like that without saying anything. Not even as he started to cry into her chest. Now Jiraiya's clone felt like he was intruding, so he gave them some final parting words. I've left some things behind at Naruto's place for you both to practice with while I'm gone. When I get back, whenever that is, I'll talk to you both. Naruto, still within Karin's hold, bobbed his head. Feeling that there was little else to say, Jiraiya's clone allowed himself to disperse. The memories flowed straight to the original in the midst of his journey with a team handpicked by the Hokage as they raced towards the hidden base in hopes of stopping Orochimaru's resurrection or putting him down once and for all. Then he met her and found out he had a clan that was wiped out. He learned that his mother died the day he was born from the Hokage. Now he learned that his father was the fourth Hokage, a great hero who died during that same incident. Seeing him like this hurt her because she didn't want him to be in pain when he was right in front of her. Especially when there was nothing else she could think to do to make things slightly more bearable for him. All she could do was hug him and offer a shoulder for him to cry on, just like the day he learned of his mother. I didn't know, Naruto said softly. I couldn't even imagine that someone like that was my father. Not even when I looked at his statue or at a picture in front of me. What kind of son am I not to even know that much? Karin licked her lips in thought, weighing her words before she said anything. There's no way you could have known, Naruto. They didn't want you to know to keep you safe. But if I had known I would have tried so much harder to live up to who they were, he said, his voice cracking. I would have tried to make them proud of me. I'm sure they are, Karin insisted. How could they not be? Look at everything you've done to protect the village. Look at how you risked your life to save me. Do you think that your father wouldn't have approved after what he did to save your mother? Just thinking about how he appeared that night still made her heart swell with warm emotions. Even when she recalled just how terrifying it was and how he had gotten hurt. She could only imagine that was at least somewhat close to how Naruto's mother felt for his father when he saved her. I just wish that I could have known them. Naruto pulled his head away from her chest, still looking down, and then took a deep breath. That we could have been a family together, you know? I know, Naruto, Karin said as she laid him back down on the bed before rising to her feet. She then set the picture aside for him. For now though, just rest for a bit. I'll go tell Shizune-san you're awake. She's supposed to be the one looking after you now. Thanks, Naruto said somewhat somberly as he turned his head towards the picture. Karin stepped out of the room, shut the door gently behind her, and then activated her mind's eye. Her perspective of the world shifted, thousands of unique signatures popping into existence within the scope of her range. She narrowed it down to the one she was searching for and found it accompanied by two other signatures, one of whom she was intimately familiar with a floor up. Turning it off and making her way to the room, Karin was about to knock on the door. You are truly a miracle worker. That was when a yell loud enough to be heard down the hallway penetrated the door. Karin held a hand to her heart and willed it to calm down. It startled her to the point that she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Lee, this is a hospital," another person, Sakura, said in a stern tone. "You have to keep your voice down." "My apologies," Lee replied to her chastising. "I just couldn't contain the youthful energy coursing through my body upon hearing that the surgery was a success." "Just keep it in mind for the future," a third voice said. It was Shizune, and she was close to the door from the sound of it. "And remember what I said. If I catch word that you're trying to push your body before it's fully healed, I'll be disappointed." "Though it pains me to be out of practice, I will keep my word," Lee promised. "I will merely have to do triple the amount of training to make up for the lost time once I am back in fighting condition. I'd recommend easing back into it a little slower than that, but as long as you wait until you've recovered." The door opened and Shizune paused upon seeing Karin. "Oh, Miss Uzumaki, is everything all right?" "Naruto's woken up, but he can't move," she said. "I told him that I would come find you." "I'll go see him now then," Shizune said. Karin stepped out of the way and watched the doctor go the way that she came. Then she turned her attention back to Sakura. The pink-haired kunoichi was wearing more casual clothing than the outfit that Karin had gotten used to seeing her wear. "It's been a while since I've seen you," Sakura said, looking her up and down. The hospital clothes Karin swapped into after they were through with the examination gown and bandages that she wore around her arms to hide the marks probably gave the impression that she was hurt more than she really was. "Did something happen to you and Naruto?" "It's a long story." Karin rubbed her shoulder in a somewhat nervous manner. There was something on her chest that she wanted to get out, but Naruto had his own problems now, and she really didn't know a lot of people that she'd be comfortable talking about it with. "If you're not busy, can we talk somewhere? I have something I want to ask you." "Sure," Sakura replied. "Just let me get a message to Lee's teammates first." Normally his sensei would do it, but he and Kakashi-sensei aren't at the village right now. They're out on some assignment from the Hokage. "I'm sorry to hear that you both went through all of that," Sakura said to Karin after hearing what she had to say, her voice somewhere between horror and amazement. The two had come outside, where the tables were set up for patients to eat and feel the autumn sun without leaving the grounds. There she had gotten her answer how Karin and Naruto had ended up in the hospital. Sakura had been out with Kakashi and Sasuke. The former had been enlisted to aid in the hunt because of his summonings and his past experience in tracking as well. They had managed to catch their escapees rather easily, but it seemed as though Karin and Naruto had gone through much more. If Naruto hadn't showed up, I probably wouldn't be here right now. But because he had to fight against the bone user alone, he ended up hurting himself, and I had already exhausted my ability to heal through having him bite me. We only got away after that because the person who was watching over me sacrificed herself to buy us time." "And you feel guilty because you couldn't do anything about it," Sakura guessed. "Everyone else was sacrificing themselves for you and all you could do was watch?" Karin, eyes lost staring into her tea, nodded her head. "I'm not a fighter, I'm a censor. I never intended to be on the front lines. Yet, if anything, this has shown me that won't be enough anymore. Every single escapee targeted me, then those sound shinobi, and then the bone user, and it's only at the expense of the people around me and Byako that I managed to stay alive. Trust me when I say I know the feeling." She could sympathize with the feeling that Karin was going through, especially since she had just visited Lee after hearing that his surgery was over. She hadn't forgotten how badly he'd been hurt attempting to save her in the forest of death. Karin extended her hand, palm upwards, and a chain emerged. "I don't know much about the limits of what I can do, but I don't want to end up in a position to just watch it all happen in front of me again. Especially not to the person I fell in love with." Sakura couldn't keep the surprise that blossomed on her face hidden at that. "Wait, I thought you and Naruto were just like family, but you actually love Naruto like that?" "How can I not after everything that's happened to this point?" Karin asked with her tone warm and bright. Despite everything he's been through in his life, he's still managed to remain sweet and friendly to just about anyone as long as they haven't crossed him. At the same time, he's brave and clever when he needs to be. He gave me trust and a home and promised not to ever abandon me. And he's done so much to try and keep it, even when it means putting his life on the line. I guess when you put it like that, it does make sense. And it sounded like something out of a romance novel. Does he feel the same way? He hasn't really answered yet, Karin said, but it's fine. I don't want to force my feelings onto him after all, and he's been busy. And even if he doesn't, I think that I'd be okay as long as I could remain a part of his life. Sakura wished she could say the same thing about Sasuke, but it felt like he was closing up more and more since that day she found him being carted into the hospital. Worse, it felt like there was nothing she could do to open him back up at this point. Sighing to herself, she said, "I don't know how much help I can be, but I'll give it a shot. Where do you want to start?" "I guess with learning to use these chains I can make," Karin said. "They can seal chakra and they're pretty hard. Plus I can manipulate them at will, but if someone is fast enough they'll get around them." "Maybe you could use them like a whip or flail," Sakura suggested. "I might have to ask Tenten for advice. She's pretty handy with weapons of all kinds." They'd really first interacted when she'd visited Lee in the hospital. It just so happened that when Tenten brought up that she was trying to expand on the versatility of her weapons capabilities rather than the number she used, Sakura had mentioned she'd heard in passing of a couple of external genjutsu that could be used to that effect. They'd been cordial ever since then, so she could probably get her to instruct Karin once or so. "If you can, then I'd appreciate it," Karin said, retracting the chain into her palm seamlessly. Once it was gone, she reached over the table with her hand extended. "And thanks for listening to me." "Don't mention it," Sakura replied, extending her own hand to shake with a slight smile. "Besides, I've actually missed hanging around with you like we did before the finals. It'll be nice to catch up."
Well, that will be all for part 8. Thank you for watching, and again, check out the author of this story in the description. Like or share so other people can see this story or video.